Morning, everybody. Well, I am fresh back from Washington, D.C. I spent the week at the National Prayer Breakfast, which was a great honor. So I'm doing something a little bit different this morning. Rather than preaching directly on the texts, I wanted to share with you my testimony about my experience at the National Prayer Breakfast. Originally, I had asked Deacon Jane to pinch hit for me and preach today because I knew that I would not have the opportunity to think long and hard and pray enough to get ready for a sermon on Sunday. But when I realized that the gospel text for the day included the reference to the shining city on the hill, I thought, how could I possibly not speak about the National Prayer Breakfast after presidents like President Kennedy and President Reagan read that phrase into the American psyche in such a powerful way. So here I am speaking to you about my experience of the shining city on a hill. And I'll try, how unusual, I will try not to feel emotional about it because it was quite moving. So apparently, Ike, back in the day, remarked to a senator that he lives, Ike, in the loneliest house in the world. The senator, hearing a cry for fellowship from his president, invited President Eisenhower to join that senator and some of the other senators who were in the habit of gathering weekly for prayer and study of Scripture and fellowship, sharing one another's lives and learning one another's testimonies. President Eisenhower accepted that invitation, and that became what we know as the National Prayer Breakfast. I didn't know quite what to expect of the prayer breakfast when I accepted the invitation. I knew that there would be some prayer involved. I knew there would probably be some breakfast involved. And I knew that the big draw for the event was the fact that the President of the United States comes to this breakfast prayer session and shares some of his or her thoughts about our family's faith together. So that's about all I really knew. What I didn't realize about myself is that I had some expectations that I didn't even realize. I expected, for example, this event, the National Prayer Breakfast, to be a gathering of religious leaders with political leaders, and I was pleasantly surprised to realize that that could not be further from the truth. To be sure, there were some celebrity clergy bumping around there. I got to hear a lovely sermon from Pastor Rick Warren out at Saddleback Church, the famous author of The Purpose-Driven Life and The Purpose-Driven Church. That was very exciting. I was walking down the hallway, and there's Robert Schuller, the former pastor of the Crystal Cathedral, looking like a normal human being. But those celebrity clergy were few and far between. For the most part, this was an opportunity for the priesthood of all believers, the citizens of the United States of America, of all classes and creeds and jobs, to come together and to pray together. So I was one of only two clergy in the Arizona delegation, and from what I could tell from the event, the vast majority were spirit-filled lay people. So I was surprised that it was not a clergy event. It was not an event for religious leaders. I also suspected to myself that this would be a grand exercise in American evangelicalism. And boy, let me tell you, I had batten down the hatches of my mouth to keep myself from saying anything typically snide when I would be under the barrage of all of this old-fashioned, old-time Americana tent revival religion. And that was not the case at all. You can be proud that the family of senators and congresspeople and the president and the president's administration are deeply committed to an inclusive experience at the National Prayer Breakfast. So it is billed as not a Christian event. It is billed as an event in the spirit of Jesus of Nazareth. And that can sound like you maybe think to yourself, what's the difference there, Ryan? But there's a big difference. Because as we know through our friendship with Temple Solel down the street, Rabbi Linder and his congregation think of Jesus as a member of the great line of their prophets and sages and rabbis. They are quite fond of him. We also know from our Islamic brothers and sisters that there is an amazing wellspring of affection for Jesus as a prophet and his teachings. So, by deliberately choosing to not identify this as an exercise in Christianity, but an exercise among the fans and friends and family members of Jesus, then it creates this unbelievably big tent where Muslims and Jews and Christians and atheists and Buddhists and just about everybody was able to find their way into this experience of gracious hospitality. I have to tell you, it was very much what I imagine the kingdom of heaven will look like someday. I think we all are in for a terrific and shocking surprise at who gets to sit with us at the Feast of Victory for our God. And this was certainly one of those experiences. That inclusivity extended to nationality. So another one of my preconceived notions was that this was going to be a very American gathering. And to be sure, there were delegations from every state of the Union and the territories, and that was wonderful. But what I was not prepared for was the fact that there were representatives from almost every nation on planet Earth that had been invited by the U.S. Senate to come into this time of fellowship in the spirit of Jesus of Nazareth. So I met the most random, extraordinary people as I was sitting around various tables. I met a member of the Israeli Knesset, and his extra job title was he was the ambassador to the Christian community. Ellie, if you're watching, it was a delight to see you there in Washington. I sat next to a New Zealand cowboy politician who was extremely excited about President Trump's election and was leading a charge in New Zealand for a return to a style of economy that didn't automatically opt for globalism, but instead valued the lives and the livelihoods of working people in each nation. He was a tremendous guy. Ron, I'm glad that you made it home. There were all of these amazing people that had been invited into this experience. And when I sat back and realized the diversity of the crowd, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is one of the few times that I actually see it with my own eyes. The shining city on the hill. I see it with my own eyes, raising up before me. It was quite beautiful. I thought to myself that it would pretty much just be the breakfast on Thursday morning, and definitely that's the main event. But there were all sorts of breakfasts and dinners and talks, and though the president is the main draw for the event, there were all sorts of very interesting people. The former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom spoke. King Abdullah of Jordan spoke. There were all of these amazing people. A Christian seminarian who, at the outbreak of the war in Iraq, he and his wife decided to move to Iraq and then were called into this incredible ministry of performing heart surgeries for the little children who had holes in their hearts from all of the chemical weapons that had been used over the course of the years. Just these incredible stories. The author of The Shack was there and got to hear him and his stories. So I was surprised at how much more it was like a conference and how it was maybe less just about the breakfast. So it was extraordinary, brothers and sisters, and if anything, I would say to you as a good Lutheran pastor, please remember that our elected leaders are humans, and many of them are members of the family of faith. They are in very complicated situations, and it would do us well, all of us, to pray for them and maybe to cut them a little bit of slack, because I saw people who were deeply worried and trying very hard and feeling very frustrated, and I realized, my goodness, these people need our prayers. So please, be mindful of that too. So, but of course, the main event, after I had had all of those unspoken expectations taken away from me by this beautiful experience, the main event, of course, is Thursday morning. So the barricades go up at early on Thursday morning to begin to protect the Washington Hilton. If you had said to me, Ryan, you're going to the Washington Hilton, I wouldn't have really thought anything of it, except for when we walked past a certain wall, and I looked at that wall and I thought, why on earth do I recognize that wall? What is it about? Well, that's where President Reagan was shot. So after that experience, things are very strict at the Washington Hilton and to prevent anything like that from happening again. So I head down. I was on the 10th floor, which those of you who have traveled with me when I'm not with my children know that I like to be on the high floors so that I am forced to take the stairs and get my steps in every day. So I walked 10 floors several times a day, which was good for me. And I had one lady who got about halfway up, and I was in uniform, and she said, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I sinned pride. I should not have thought that I could actually make it up all these stairs." So came down the stairs. There's a huge group of people. This was, from what I understand, the largest turnout for the National Prayer Breakfast. It was just people everywhere, huge crowds down there, and you go through a metal detector, and they wand you down just to make sure everything's okay. You get assigned a seat, and I was at one of the tables at the very edge of this massive, massive ballroom. And some couple people said, "Oh, Father, I'm so sorry you're way back here." And I said, I rarely get a chance to sit in the back row, so it's kind of nice. Sat down there at the table, a little continental breakfast there, met a missionary and his wife that were preparing to head to Africa, met a couple, an engineer and a stay-at-home mom from Tennessee, met someone who was a political operative for the Christian university system, so I think that means a lobbyist sitting there. Met someone who identified as one of the chaplains for the Democrats there on the Hill. It was a very, very interesting group of people, and I have to tell you, without exception, each and every person around that table was saying that whether they were Republican or Democrat or something else, they were all rooting for the president and wanted that morning to be a successful experience for him and for us. So I thought that was gentle and good and nice, and I was happy to hear that. Then the events get started, and who should step to the podium for the opening prayer but Ben Zobrist. Anybody? Are my Cubs fans around? Yeah, oh yeah. Barb is like, yes, oh, that's... Barb just got the Holy Spirit right in the middle of the Lutheran Church sermon. Ben is the MVP from the last World Series and is a person of deep faith. And so he was invited to give the opening prayer. After a few other introductions, we had the Reverend Rear Admiral, the Senate chaplain, Reverend Barry, who came to give the keynote speech. And for those of you who have ever had the pleasure of listening to an African-American preacher, he was awesome. He was quite moving, and a lot of people really responded to that. Even had a great conversation with a Muslim lady who said how inspiring that was. Our attention was directed to our tables, and there at every place around the table was a small blue book, and on the front of the book it just said, Jesus. And if you opened it up, it was the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles. But instead of identifying them as Gospels, it was just Jesus, according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, according to each one of them. And then the Acts of the Ambassadors. So I thought, oh man, even in this cute little micro Gospels volume, they are trying to make the effort to create common ground among the people who were in attendance. Then, oh no, I can't remember his name. Mark Burnett. Isn't Mark Burnett the producer for Survivor, the producer for The Apprentice? His wife is Roma, Touched by an Angel, Roma, and they put together the Bible series. Mr. Burnett was the one who was introducing the president. They had a very close working relationship over the years. And then here's the President of the United States, and it's time for him to share. There was a tender moment of lighthearted humor when the president entered. First, the vice president and his wife came in, and everybody stands and applauds and then sits down. And then the president comes in, and everybody stands and applauds, and then the president moved to his chair, and he was standing there waiting for the program to continue, and he maybe did not realize that we would not sit down until he sat down. So he was looking around and, oh, aren't you all so nice? And what's next on the docket? And finally, Senator Boozman, I think, said to him, "Sir, you're able to sit down. We'll sit with you." Oh, and there was some giggles, and they were obviously very chummy with one another, and so then everybody sat down. And I will say I was disappointed when the press, one of the first things that came out of the National Prayer Breakfast in reporting was the president's remark about praying for Arnold Schwarzenegger and the ratings for The Apprentice. That was definitely a joking, lighthearted moment, and it was playing right off of what his introducer had just been saying. So I was sad that that was the thing that came out first. And I've watched it since, and you can't hear the audience, but there was a lot of laughter in the audience. It was meant to be a lighthearted moment, not a serious one. The president spoke about the importance of religious liberty and spoke about the fact that ISIS and terrorism and terrorist organizations compromise the religious liberty of people all around the planet. And that was a statement that seemed to be warmly received in the assembly by this very diverse assembly. And I know that later that day when King Abdullah spoke at the lunch, he also said, friends, we must do something about, his term was, these outlaws of Islam. They are hurting us all. They are hurting faithful Muslims. They are hurting faithful Christians. They are hurting faithful Jews. And that seemed to be well received by the assembly, including this group of folks that come from a diversity of backgrounds. He had one comment that I think was maybe lost on many of the people because, again, you're not dealing with religious leaders. You're dealing with faithful people of God from all walks of life. The president mentioned something about getting rid of something called the Johnson Amendment. And that maybe fell a little flat in the hall because people didn't know what that was. Well, I happen to know what that is. The Johnson Amendment is a part of the tax code that says that churches included in the nonprofit status as taxed organizations are not allowed to endorse candidates and are not allowed, therefore, to make political contributions, financial contributions, to campaigns. President Trump thought that he would like to propose removing that restriction so that pastors, priests, and rabbis like me would be able to endorse a political candidate for you and would be able to encourage our respective religious communities to make campaign contributions. So that one fell pretty flat because folks didn't know what the Johnson Amendment was. I personally think that's not a great idea. I think that especially for us Lutheran Christians, we have a friendly and adversarial relationship with our elected leaders all the time. We pray for whoever is in office. We consider it a deep responsibility to do so. And whoever is in office, we like to have the freedom to be able to push back and say those ideas or proposals that feel contradictory to our vision of what Jesus is calling us to, and hopefully what God has in mind for our country. So I will say that will probably be a place where I feel comfortable contacting the White House and the Arizona congressional delegation and saying, please, ladies and gentlemen, let's keep our churches purple. Let's keep our churches in a place where Republicans and Democrats, much like the prayer breakfast, are able to come together with a great variety of people, and that there won't be Republican churches and there won't be Democrat churches, but that instead we will model being held together. I will say that the president received a warm round of applause. He did not say this, but again, I think that the word got out that this was the largest attendance for a prayer breakfast, maybe, I think, in its history. It was just absolutely packed, and it was an amazing experience. I got to see a moment where the city on the hill was shining, and it was shining brightly and beautifully, and all the world was gathered there to be a part of it. I was blessed to have a member of Ascension that was a previous participant in prayer breakfasts. So Mr. Scott Rehorn. Scott, would you stand up? Scott was one of our experienced guys. Scott has buddies and pals all over the world as a result of this Shining City on a Hill experience. And Scott, thank you for letting me be a part of that amazing experience. And Scott would have all sorts of tremendous things to offer to you about it. And then also another Ascension connection is that Stu Graff, who is the son of Donna, the brother of Kathy Graff. So if you would just raise your hands. Stu was one of the captains who helped to organize the prayer breakfast. People come and it happens very organically. There is no quota system. It's just this really beautiful system of invitation and welcome, and it was an amazing experience to be a part of it. And I know for sure that we should pray. We should give some slack to our friends who maybe think differently than we do, and continue to be drawn together, again, like at the prayer breakfast, by the Spirit of Jesus of Nazareth. You'd be surprised at how popular he still is, even if we in the church sometimes don't have such a great reputation. Jesus is still very popular, and I have every ounce of faith that he is doing a beautiful thing in us, through us, and in our nation and world. Not much of a sermon, I'm sorry, but thank you for allowing me to process with you. God bless you all for being here.